Can the Chinese help Zimbabwe, and how can they do this? Now, if we expect the Chinese to help Zimbabwe, I think we forget that China has got a much bigger population than Africa. They need to take 1 billion people out of poverty, and so I don't think China is in a position to want to really help Zimbabwe because they've got their own problems. So that's number one. Number two, China is not only in Zimbabwe. China is all over Africa. In fact, China is all over the world. So China has interest in every country of the world. I'm told that they bought a mountain in Peru because of the copper which is found on that mountain. They are in Zambia, they are in South Africa, they are in Botswana, they are in Angola, okay? They are in America, they are in the UK. So the Chinese are everywhere. Now, for us to expect that the Chinese are coming to help is to ignore the fact that they've got 1 billion people to take out of poverty. They need food because they have a growing population which needs food. They don't have as much land as Africa has, so they might want some of the land for producing crops, for producing food, so they'll need that. Also for producing even livestock, they'll need land for that because they need the products for consumption in China. One of the things that people have mentioned is that the Chinese can help us with machinery. I think it's a given that yes, they've got the machinery and they'll probably help us with machinery, but I think there is always the risk that the machinery which they are providing is actually being used for their own purposes. So it might be that the Chinese have decided to use cheap labor if they don't, because they've been accused as well in the past of bringing their own people to provide labor because they've got a population which they need to employ, and there are just not enough jobs in China. So when they bring their workers out of China to Africa, they're actually trying to provide employment for those workers. So yes, so in terms of the machinery, it might be machinery that they are using just to run their own businesses in Africa. But of course, there will be some benefit out of that machinery. In terms of expertise, yes, they'll bring in some expertise, but traditionally the Chinese have always looked for expertise in other places. So whenever they've gone to another continent, to another people, they've tried to take ideas from there. They've tried to take products and services which are found in that area. They've taken it back home, reverse engineered it, and after now being able to make that product or to provide that service, they have been able to provide employment for their own people. So the sort of expertise that we expect from the Chinese, I don't think it's something that we can really build an economy out of. We can't really drive economic growth and development just by importing expertise from the Chinese. Remember, the Chinese have for their own problems. And then the biggest argument is that the Chinese are building infrastructure. And I think, yes, we will benefit from the infrastructure. But maybe if it's something like a football stadium, okay, we might benefit from that. But we've seen in the past how they bring in their own people to build those stadiums. And some of the stadiums are not of a good quality. And we've seen how the National Sports Stadium has been reported to have collapsed. But these are the same people who will build a similar, who will have a similar project, say in the United Kingdom. But because the UK is very strict on quality control, the Chinese will make sure that the product they build for the British is a much better product than the one they built for Zimbabwe, for example. Because as Zimbabweans, we think, oh, they are the experts, they know what they are doing. So we're not scrutinizing them. We've seen how when the Chinese wanted to build nuclear power stations in the UK, that was considered a strategic piece of work, which the Chinese might well have insight into, and it becomes a national security threat or a national security risk for the British to allow the Chinese to work on nuclear power stations. So that's in terms of infrastructure. And the painful part about the infrastructure is that most of it is infrastructure, for example, railways or roads or even airports. Okay, this is infrastructure which is leading directly to places where there are resources, because the Chinese want those resources. So they build the infrastructure to enable them to take resources out of Africa. This is something that African governments need to be aware of when they are dealing with the Chinese. So here is the deal. The Chinese will take advantage if the people of Africa are willing to be taken advantage of. Okay? The British don't allow the Chinese to take advantage. So when the Chinese are dealing with the British, they do things in a different way. But when they are dealing with Africans, they behave differently because we allow them to do that. So I think it's also up to our politicians to ensure that they do not see the accumulation of assets like cars and properties as something which is more important than the future of a country like Zimbabwe, for example. Okay, so the politicians need to make sure that they are not being bought, they are not being corrupted just because they want a few goodies from the Chinese. So they end up giving them lucrative deals which don't benefit the country. So that's as far as whether or not the Chinese can help Zimbabwe. I think they can help Zimbabwe if Zimbabwe is also helping them in some way. But to expect them to just come and help us for nothing, I think is a bit myopic and perhaps very naive. Okay, so let's look at how we can both benefit, the Chinese and Africans, how we can benefit from a mutual relationship, okay, based on fairness in our dealings.